Hello and welcome to the New School HR podcast. This is episode 6 of season 2, titled Investigation. So, the investigation process. It's a weird one because I always thought this would be sort of the first podcast I did. Because I think when I go back over my HR career, this is kind of the not the pinnacle moment, that's a bit extreme, but I think this is kind of the point where you sort of get your foot into I don't want to say the real world, because that sounds like those who don't do it aren't living it, but I think for me this was the biggest step in my early years. I was very fortunate that it didn't take long for me to get there, but I always remember that significant feeling of like, oh my God, what if I get this wrong? Oh my God, what if I say something or whatever? I then found out that I didn't need to fucking talk. All I had to do was take notes. So, look, I think there's different formats. And you know what, this is off the script actually. It's not anything to sort of mention, but I thought I'll just cover it anyway as I'm thinking it through. I think one of the things that we in HR miss is that we are not the holders of meetings. Now, there are times when you will be. So there have been times when I've actually done an investigation as an investigation manager, if you like. And then I've had another HR person take notes. But it's a weird one because in the adjournment, you're gonna get involved. And look, this is the same for disciplinary, so I can save myself some time tomorrow. I'll cover it up here. Yes, you'll provide thoughts. You'll maybe have to reference policy in that in the adjournment. But 9 times out of 10 in an investigation, you ain't going to say anything. I think it's about the prep work that you do with the manager. Now, it depends on the levels in your organization, I guess, in terms of your HR structure and what involvement you have. Where I am today as a HR business partner, we're very much involved in the investigation process, but that's because we have a young team and we don't have that many layers within the HR function. Young team as in the manager's a young team, not age-wise, but in experience of people management. So yes, I get involved. But in other organizations I've worked in, I've never really had to get involved, obviously, as a business partner, but I used to when I was going back in time, personnel assistant. And again, it was about the prep work, to be honest. I don't know if that's just a reflection of myself and what I wanted to get out of, that experience, or I don't really know what caused me to sort of be involved in so much detail. But the key thing I learned is that it's not our job to run these meetings. And the manager has to understand, and the manager has to take accountability for whatever it is the outcome is. But they also need to take accountability for the questioning and, setting the right tone in that. Because what you don't want is it to become a process of, well, HR did it. And that's a very important message, because what you want is your management team to take full ownership, and whether that's a supervisor doing it or a manager doing it or whatever, you want them to have accountability for it, because you want them to understand that it is their decision. So you're there to support, you're there to offer advice. And I think, look, if you see something that's wrong, then obviously you need to mention it. I think in the first company, the retailer, I think it even says that, HR is here to make sure that the process is fair and whatever, in the invite. So I just wanted to cover that bit off. But it is quite, the first time you get into one, it is almost a moment in time. It is an opportunity for you to see what potentially I think a lot of people think HR is about. I mean, I've come to realize over the years that the investigation and disciplinary side is not the be-all and end-all of HR. Not something particularly I like getting involved in. Not because any particular reason, then, it's not actually what we're there for. I think it's a negative reflection on culture and stuff like that. And I'd always try and find a way to see what we can do ahead of a formal process. Now, in some instances, you have to. Obviously, I get that. But, yeah, it's it's there for that. I'm not going to keep talking because I got the pointers there. But yeah, okay, so we'll actually crack on with the podcast now. So look, the first thing to understand with an investigation is, why the fuck are we investigating someone in the first place? And that might sound really, well, swearing might not sound great, but that might sound like well, what do you mean, For me, when you start off, well, okay, let's start again. So in some companies, an investigation is formal because you have to provide a written notification of investigation because it's in your policies to do so. And in some businesses, it's purely fact-finding. And it's not treated as anything formal. There's no formal invite or anything like that, unless someone's been suspended, of course. But other than that, it's fact-finding. So there are differences. Now, me personally, I like to have a actual understanding of what the reason is behind why we're going to an investigation. And the one thing I would say is that if you're policy heavy in your company, just because something falls under a policy title, have a think if that means you actually need to investigate it. I think we see things around process or whatever. And look, you even get the more extreme ones around gross misconduct. Things like abusive language or something like that. But actually find out with what you know about the incident and just think it through. I think the other thing is to understand when you get this, is it misconduct or is it gross misconduct? Because that's the other piece here. There are things where the bracket sits in writing under gross misconduct, but it doesn't necessarily mean it is. And be mindful of that as well. In some companies, if you say something is gross misconduct, that means you automatically have to give either one of three sanctions. And so there are some companies where, the second one I worked in, we would actually downgrade from a gross misconduct to a misconduct if we felt relevant. But you are confined by your actual policies. So one of the things I have learned recently is, well, to be honest, apart from the retailer, the retailer was very policy heavy. I'll be very clear on that, but the policy was quite flexible, so you didn't have to stick to it. Whereas more recently, it's very rigid, very, very rigid, and that can sometimes be to your detriment because it means it takes away the facility to do things offline, if you like, not necessarily formally. I think the other thing is to, gather all the relevant details, what you can by yourself. And I think that's a key thing that goes missing. So, what I see is managers like, we need to investigate. And it's straight away like, bang, we need to investigate. This is what's happened. So I therefore ask them to, without getting the person involved, just make sure they can get whatever it is they're required. So it's the who, the what, the when, the how, the why, those things. You have to think about fairness. So the one thing I don't like is where managers will say, this is a misconduct or whatever, but somebody has literally done it the day before, the exact same thing, and it hasn't even been brought to my attention. So I always go back with a simple question of, what happened to the last person that did it? And then they'll say, what do you mean? And I'll say, well, this thing that you're claiming is so bad, are you telling me that no one else has ever done it before? And they'll say, oh, it happened last week. And what did we do with that person? Nothing. Why? And, sometimes, look, maybe there's a reason why. But I think that's generally, the moment in time, if you like. And then I would be saying, is this something we need to do informally? And also, is this something we need to be briefing to everybody? Because we don't have favorites here. So, by the way, I just want to cover one thing, even though this is like podcast number 20, I think, now, or something like that we're recording. So you may notice that there's always the little music that goes on between every segment. That's because originally my plan was to put time, I don't know what they're called, times between each sections on the description. So that's why you have it, and that's why it stays. For season 2, that will be in place. But if you've been around since season 1, good on you for staying around. So the next part is fact finding. So, well, I say this, and again, I think it depends on what your policy is around investigation. So if it's a formal process, it's a formal process. So you have to kind of bypass this part, well, to a degree. But in most instances, I always try to make sure that the employee understands that this is purely fact-finding. And look, reality is, whether it's formal or not in investigation, there's no decision made on the outcome. And no formal decision will be made on the outcome. So, well, in the investigation, let's be clear. So that's the first thing. And I always make sure that they understand that this is about hearing their answers, and also anything that they may have to add, or anything that they have that we need to know about. Whether that be evidence, whether that be understanding, or whatever. I always say have your questions ready ahead of the meeting. So if Mr. Manager has got all the details that he has prior to going into the investigation, then that will obviously be the basis of your questioning. But the other thing I would do is always ask someone what their understanding is of the situation that's happened. So for example, if it's something around, I don't know, a process, I'd ask them to explain what the process is. And I'd also ask them when they were last trained. Now, the training should also be part of the evidence that the manager should have, so let's be clear on that. But I would ask them. And to me, if the explanation is really good, then I would expect that they know it. So I would then be asking, why haven't they done it? If it's something that is involving more than one person, you might have to speak to other people. So obviously you'll speak to your first person first, get their version of events. You'll look at whatever the evidence is, and then you'll have to formalize questions for the next set of people. The key part to that is making sure that the questions are the same. And if the questions change because of something that is said, then for me, you have to go back and visit the other people and ask the same question again. Otherwise, for me, that's match fixing. So, look, an investigation can be a long process. I think that's what I'm trying to get at here. Unless Mr. Person puts their hands up and literally says, yes, I did that, and you can proceed. On the back of that, as HR, you need to be familiar with the policy and procedures that are relevant, because if you're not, you're going to fall flat. And that has happened to me, where I'll just be honest, I didn't know what the policy was from a HR point of view. I think my experience kind of makes me feel like, okay, I can just go with what I know, sort of thing. And I'm not going to lie to you, 99% of the time, that's fine. But you do need to be aware of nuances. So, for example, where I am now, if you have an absence, I know we're not talking about absence, but if you've got an absence sanction, once you get it, everything resets. I ain't never heard of that before. I ain't never heard of the opportunity to re-hit an absence level again. But that's what happens. So you need to be aware of these nuances. And look, am I going to say that means you need to go and read all 17,000 pages? Probably not. So it's just, if you have something that's a bit you're unsure of, and look, you'll be doing your meeting discussions with the manager anyway. So you'll have an idea of what you need to be aware of. And if you're not too sure, or you think it's very company specific, then make sure you have a look at it. Ensuring that the employee has the opportunity to review what is being said, think about it, and provide an answer is also very important. I think sometimes we do an investigation, we ask our questions, we shut the door, and that's it. That's not the way to do it. I think sometimes, I've seen many disciplinary's thrown out because the investigation team didn't bother. They just kind of, you know, got through at a pace, and then it's all kind of fallen on its head when we got to the disciplinary stage. So, the next thing is the controversial question: do you need a representative? Sorry, let's start that again. Do you need to offer a representative at the investigation stage? So, the answer is no, you do not. However, if your policy states so, the answer is yes. So let that sink in. So make sure you're familiar with your policies. Me, myself, well, I say this. In the last company, it wasn't written in the policy, and therefore I didn't specifically go out my way to offer a representative. I am not going to lie. What I did do was, if they asked could they be representative, then I would allow it. What I would also say is I would always have a note taker. That's one thing I would always ensure. That there is a note taker there to be some form of witness. And then obviously all three people sign the notes. This is the same for the union representative as well, though. So you don't have to offer a union representative, but if they want one, then allow for one. For me personally, I don't have a problem with people wanting representation. I don't go out my way to make life difficult, but yeah, just be mindful of that. That, you know, there is a possibility they'll want it. In terms of, if you like, delaying the start of the investigation, that can be, I think you need to think about it. So, for example, if they haven't been notified of the investigation and they want a union representative, and you don't have a union representative on site, you're going to have to adjourn for them to collect one. Now, obviously, adjourn means a reasonable amount of time. So, from experience, they should be able to get a representative within 48 hours. In the investigation stage, I would probably, if there's any evidence or anything like that, they wouldn't have it yet. But I would consider maybe giving them that anyway. I don't know. I don't know what best practice is there. But I would, well, if they ask for it, would I not give it? I probably would. You're going to give them everything at the end of the hearing anyway. And they're going to get presented with it at the hearing anyway and have to answer it. So I'm not against it. But again, you don't have to until you get to the meeting. If they don't have a trade union rep and they just want an employee, then I think sort of delaying it by 15 minutes or half an hour maybe for them to go and get someone is reasonable as well. I mean, there are times when I've done a meeting and they want a representative and the rep is at break. So what can you do? You have to allow that person maybe to even come back on site if they're not there. I would always ensure that if it's a serious, gross misconduct, I will always ensure that we do allow the rep to be present. I have done investigations without the rep, so if the rep is taking too long, whether that's one internally, or, you do get those instances where somebody asks for a rep who is potentially linked to the actual case that you're investigating, and that can be, obviously you're not going to allow it, right? So in that case, I would offer them a different rep, and if they decide that they don't want one, then I would continue with one. I'd just notify in the notes that obviously this is what was agreed. So there is a whole piece around as well. If you do something, you can make sure the notes reflect those actions, and then obviously that's the opportunity to get those signed as well. So for example, if we've waited for a representative and they haven't made themselves available or whatever, they haven't got one, I would just put it in the notes that, we adjourn this meeting at whatever time. reconvened, there wasn't no rep for this reason, and then they sign. I'll just make a note of it, moving forward towards a disciplinary hearing, that is something that needs to be considered, that they did want a representative and they didn't have one. The other thing I would do is just make sure that, with documents and stuff like that, these are kept to what is specific, and then obviously you can share those. So, the evidence of the crime itself. So, I would always ensure that you have the actual evidence, and the evidence is actually factual and to the point. So one of the worst thing I see is when you get a customer complaint who doesn't name the person. It just says, I won't be using your services anymore because of the service I received. Or you get, the driver who will say, your driver had a go at me. We pulled over. We had an argument, but I didn't get the registration number or whatever. If we're doing specific things on the back of information from a member of the public or a customer or whatever, or even a member of staff, then for me, we need to make sure we have the exact details. Because for me, I wouldn't feel comfortable if somebody came up to me and asked me a question around what was I doing on the A426. Is that the road? That's really bad. I'm trying to think of that road in London, the A426. No, the A406, there you go. If I had an alleged incident on the A406 and I pulled over and me and said individual got into an occasion or whatever, it's very unlikely they're not going to get my number plate, isn't it? Let's keep it real. You just get a very vague description, right? So there's that bit. I would always ask the customer to elaborate. Sorry, by the way, I said I would get the person to elaborate, the manager. I kind of turned this on its head. We keep forgetting that I was a manager as well, right? So the manager should be getting more detail. It's their job to do it, especially if they're the one that wants to act on it. I always, if there's an incident that's happened, so if it's not a procedural thing, you should know your area anyway, in terms of if it's in a building. Obviously, if it's external in the public eye or something like that, it might not be so easy to, but, have an understanding of where CCTV is as well. That's one of the biggest things I see people miss is like CCTV. If you're in a work location, there's more than likely CCTV somewhere. It doesn't mean it's always going to be where the incident took place, but just have an awareness of it. I mean, one of the things I like to do is have a go on the CCTV cameras anyway. So I would, see what kind of angles are around and stuff like that, just for reference point. And also think about the kind of surroundings. So is there other offices where people may have heard something or whatever? If the investigation is around a process, have the documentation that this person has been trained or signed to say they've had the briefing or whatever. Because, I've seen so many cases thrown out because they're like, oh, yeah, this person knows what to do, they're trained. And there's nothing, absolutely nothing. And then when you ask the trainers, did you train this individual? They're like, or you find out the training is from like 2004. And we've had like 17 different system changes since then. So you need to be mindful of that as well. And have that with them. In terms of statements, if you're using a statement, ensure the statement is signed. And again, making sure that all the same questions have been asked by people who have been asked to do it. I would say, I've written here, make sure the statements are aligned. That might not be the case. People have different interpretations of an incident. I think one of the things I like to do is when we're doing statements is ask them, how would you have reacted in this situation, or how did you feel the tone of the conversation was, or the tone of the question, whatever it might have been, just to get an idea, because we do get people who, am I allowed to say it, just fucking sensitive, like they're proper emotional about shit, and you just think to yourself, there's a difference between a manager and going off the handle, or even employee to employee going off the handle. And sometimes you get these clashes because of one potentially being more emotional than the other. And in that instance, you need to find a clear way to separate those behaviors. And the only way you can do it is, if you've got people that witnessed it, that's great, because you can actually ask for their understanding of it. You can ask if they've seen similar things from the person. in terms of traits or whatever. So it's very important that you use those statements to get the right kind of, information. I mean, you might find it comes back and says that the other person was the aggressor. Right, that's happened. The person who's put in the complaint turns out to be the aggressor. And then you're kind of in a tricky place. But yeah, it'll end up in mediation. If for me, if we're talking about a process thing or a complaint or whatever, if you're not happy with the evidence you have, then just don't fucking pursue it. Because the reality is, what are you going to prove? I think this is in the last company I worked for, it's very bad like that because our customers all knew the stuff and all that kind of stuff. It was a very incestuous business industry. And sometimes you just get someone just literally starting some shit, and then when you ask for the details, there's fuck all there. Like nothing. So what are you supposed to do? Just go to someone and say, this customer doesn't like you. Why? Don't know. They're still trading with us, so they're not a threat of loss of business. They're still spending the same amount, if not more. Still prepared to see the same individual, but they've just said they weren't happy with what they did on that day. Yeah. And to be honest, in the retail place, I used to get the same thing. Like, this person didn't refund my item. What item and why? My item. Well, some of them we can't refund, so what item? I don't remember. I bought 87 items that week. Okay, so what one was you upset about? I don't know. Yeah. At the end of the day, when you investigate someone, you got to give them a case, right? You have to come forward with why you're sitting in front of them. And that's the bit that a lot of managers miss. We get a bit hyped. We're like, oh shit, this person's fucked up, or this person's ruined everything, or this person's a detriment to the business, or whatever. There's nothing there. Kind of covered this, but I'm going to read the points as they are and then expand if we can. So, it's section 5, who to speak to. So we talked about if it's external and a statement and all that. I think you get my view on that. The other thing I would say is I did cover it. That's fine. We're not going to go into it. Speak to the employee in the first instance to allow them the chance to respond. So that's in the investigation. Yeah, that doesn't mean you speak to them before the investigation. That's if you've got all the sort of correct things you need, like time, date, etc., etc. Now, for me, if it's a complaint that has no CCTV or no proof, it is the old case of he said, she said. And if you get an individual where the incident's taking place and there's no witnesses, you haven't got anyone to ask, it is definitely he said, she said. And what I would say is be mindful of the incident that has happened. So I have seen quite a few, how to explain it? There's been quite a few like that, where there's been one-on-one arguments and then someone has come in at the tail end of it. And, that person has seen one person, the clear aggressor, or, whatever. They've seen the end, right? They haven't seen the whole thing. So, yes, it's important to get that person's statement, but be mindful of what the two parties say. And it might be a bit of back and forth. I mean, if we're talking physical violence or something like that, I mean, it's a difficult one. I myself, the incident I had. Actually, you know what? I was thinking something through. I got disciplined once, and I never got investigated. But then I didn't deny it. That's true, and it was on CCTV, so there wasn't much to get away with there. That did happen, but Now I think about it, I never had the opportunity to actually say what happened in my version of events because I realized camera angles and all that. So that's the other thing to think about. The camera angle won't necessarily show you. The camera angle was pointed at me in this instance. And the person who I'm going to say was the aggressor, his back was to the camera, so you couldn't see anything apart from me because he didn't sort of move his arms or anything really until he came round to my side of the table, at which point then you could see everything. But yeah, I guess from that view, you couldn't actually see who was the person who started it, because the argument for that individual could have been, well, you didn't see what he said to me. Like, you can't lip read what I was saying, which is fair. But yeah. I'm not on board with speaking to the witnesses before you spoke to the individual. I don't know. I prefer to speak to the individual to ask them. Purely because if they admit to it or whatever, then why am I going to drag more people in? I think that's when it becomes more punitive, and that's when employees will lose sort of faith with the manager as well. If a process is wrong or whatever, speak to the individual, give them the opportunity. The other thing is that when you get your evidence, so even if it's process-wise, so a breach of process, whatever, this might show you that there's a problem wider than just your team or your individual. So you have to be mindful of that. And, we do get those instances sometimes where it's, well, the supervisor said I could do it this way. And you then have to speak to that person, and then that person says, yeah, that's the way I told them to do it. So who's at fault then? Do you then discipline the supervisor? So you got to be mindful of this. These, when you speak to people, these instances may cough up other things. So that's what I say about process and stuff. It's not always clear cut. Like, I remember one in the last workplace. This guy was able, right? He was able, and the company had an electronic holiday system, and for some reason, this manager decided to use a paper-based version and just totally bypass the system. So he had done the paper-based version, and then we told them all to do electronically. And for whatever reason, nobody did this person's holidays on the system. Like, it's not his fault. He's done it his way. He didn't know. That's the way he's done it for 20 years. So he went off. He went off to another country. He went to the Caribbean. And came back to his third AWOL letter, I think it was, inviting into his disciplinary. I know we're talking about investigation, but if we had thought about this a bit more at the invite to investigation stage from AWOL. By the way, you will invite someone to an investigation if they're AWOL. But yeah, if we had thought about the process and everything and had a look deeper within ourselves, we wouldn't have even done the AWOL process. We possibly would have waited until he returned from holiday. And then obviously he comes in, he's all suntanned and everything, and he's, we're asking him, why did you go AWOL? Holiday wasn't approved. So it turned out his holiday wasn't approved because nobody told me and because I have this signed slip. Right. Okay. So speaking to the supervisor about it, the supervisor was like, yeah, I told him to do that. Okay, so you decided to go against policy. Yeah. Okay. Well, I hope you enjoyed your trip to the Caribbean. Sorry for the letters that you had to open when you got here. And we'll have to brief everyone and tell them that we fucked up. Thank you and have a good day. So yeah. So, point 6. Again, I've covered it at the end. Are there any flaws? So the first thing when you're doing the investigation or even before the investigation, and I've covered this throughout, is make sure the policy and procedures are reviewed. So yeah, not just from a HR point of view, operational as well. Make sure there is a clear understanding of what we're going to discuss. I think the other thing to bear in mind here is sometimes these people are super users, and they might not be defined as super users, but trust me, when you put someone against a wall about how they used the handset incorrectly or what button they did wrong, they'll soon tell you exactly what they did, And not only that, they'll train you on some shit too. I've seen that many times in the first company where, we've been looking at stock count, accuracy or whatever, and you're going at them with a process that they've breached or whatever, and actually they tell you that this is a better way of doing it. And actually they haven't breached it, they just done it different to what the paper says. And so that's the other thing you need to be mindful of as well. That really goes amiss sometimes. That can be really embarrassing for the manager too. HR, we wouldn't be expected to know the processes, but I would urge you to make sure that your managers understand that they should understand, the process. And I think that comes to the whole piece around managers not necessarily knowing how to use the tools that they've been given or the team use. So yeah, just have a thought on that. If the incident is a new incident, so I don't know, maybe you got a new process, or maybe you got a new system, or maybe you got a new way of doing things, and this is the first actual disciplinary that has taken place, then you need to think about what do you actually do. Because on the face of a lot of things, it says that we must sack everyone, or whatever it says, right? If we're being completely honest. But what you need to think about is, well, one, is there an issue with the policy or something itself anyway? And two, what is the tone you want to set if it is something you need to, investigate further? And the reason I say that is because if it's something that can avoid and can be a learning, then this is that time when you have to do it. And if it's something that other people could potentially do, whether that's a mistake or whatever, then we need to think about that. And we need to educate others so they don't make the same mistake. If the process is not followed within the actual department, and this is a known thing, then again, we need to think about, is it an educational piece? So if you've got processes and procedures that have been in place for like 10 years, and actually 5 years ago, everyone started doing something very different, and the manager knows this, so there's a difference between the first example I gave at this section. That might be the manager isn't aware, but if the manager has willingly turned a blind eye, and allowed this to happen continuously, then who's at fault? Because, we do get the managers who kind of allow stuff to slide because actually it gets the job done and they don't have to manage something or they don't have to do something themselves. And what happens is someone new comes in above them or peer-to-peer and they actually identify that there's an issue and then it's flagged. Now, that's the bit where you have to be honest as the manager. What are you doing? And if you're allowing it, then we really need to think about what we do next, yeah? So, is that a disciplinary, not disciplinary, is that an investigation for the manager? Very well could be. I think if that's the case, then the manager needs to be made to apologize to the individual. And not only that, it needs to be explained to the team what is wrong, and the retraining needs to happen. The other thing to think about is when you get, say, like this person swore at someone or insubordination or whatever, was the employee provoked into it? So what was the lead up to that situation? Because I've seen examples, and one of the common ones is this person failed to do a reasonable task. And what did you ask them to do? Task A. Okay. Who else do you ask to do it? No one. Why not? Well, right, so is it reasonable then? On the probability of balance, it's not. So that's the piece, right? And for me, I see it. You'll get In the last company I worked for, they didn't have cleaning services. So why is it only one person in that building? There's 6 people. Why is only one person cleaning the toilets? And you might say, okay, it's rank, which I totally fucking disagree with. Let's just put that out there. But even if you want to use rank, there's 3 people with the same job title. Why is he the only one doing it? Kind of answers itself, doesn't it? So when the person tells you to fuck off, what do you think? And I think this is a more mature outlook on things. And for me, that's how you build the employee engagement, is that you allow people to express themselves and you let them hold whoever it is accountable for the management of the team. Now, a lot of people might disagree with that, but I think that is what does it. If you know that as a manager or as an individual that you're in an environment where if something's not right, you can challenge it and it will be listened to, doesn't that make you feel more comfortable? Doesn't that make you feel more inclusive? Because the reason a lot of people don't draw on their ideas or try and raise suggestions or whatever is because of the fear of being shot down or the fear of what happens to people who speak up. So that's something to have in mind. The next thing is to predict the outcome. And when I say predict the outcome of a disciplinary. So the way I was always trained was you think about the next stage and then the next stage. So what I try to think about in terms of when I'm doing an investigation, I'll be honest, I think about it. If one of my mates get this in HR, they're going to overturn it because I've looked at things too harshly or whatever. And I think one thing to bear in mind is that you have to know your teammates well in HR and the peer group as well, the manager peer group. Because once it goes out of investigation, or it depends if the investigation disciplinary team is kept within team or department, but the likelihood is the appeal is definitely going out of department. And then this is where I encourage managers to think about, how does this look to someone external? And look, you have managers who are at different stages in their management career, yeah? And you'll have ones who are potentially more experienced and maybe have a larger view to look at. It doesn't mean they're going to be more lenient or more strict, but they just got a larger view. And then you're going to have ones who are fucking outright power hungry. I don't care what anyone says. There are managers out there who just want to sack everyone. We all know it. And then and look, that goes for HR as well, okay? There are those people like that too. And then there is those who are just, they're new to it and they don't really know what to do. I mean, I'd be honest, I factor my management involvement, if you like, in the investigation disciplinary based on what approach we need for the situation. So there are times when you need the hard bastard approach, yeah, there is. And then there's other times where you need the sensible, thoughtful approach. And then there are times when you need the gentle approach, even if it's a dismissal, So you need to understand your management team so that you're able to kind of have that view on who can lead whatever stage it is. So you've got all your evidence. You're at the adjournment stage of your investigation. Sorry, we have a little pause there because I didn't realize I was recording in the wrong field. So just to lay it out for you, I have 2 different fields that I record in. One is for the music and one is for my voice. The one for my voice is set up in a way that allows it to be as professional sounding as it is. Hey. And the other thing is actually I've realized that there was actually an issue with the mic as well. So there's a couple of odd sounds on there when I've been talking. So it kind of stuttered. That is because I didn't set it up, but for some reason the microphone set itself to do some extreme clarity thing, and obviously the pace at which I'm talking at is kind of stumbled a few times. So yeah, that's really good to know on episode 6 when you've been recording for 2 weeks and Yeah, I'm not going back to do the others. Right, so anyway, things to look at. Once the evidence has been reviewed and you're at that adjournment stage, I look at past outcomes. Yeah, so what has other people got for it? Sometimes it is a case of, looking at the precedents. It might be that you have to change it, right? So that, I think the other thing I have to say is that I'm not against disciplinaries, right? There might be times when you have to say, you know what, fuck this. We need to actually put a firm foot in the ground. Especially if you've got a new manager or something like that of a team. Or if, traditionally in the past, you just got a informal discussion for something that was quite serious. So I'm not against us using a harsher tone. Sometimes that's what's needed, especially if you're new to an area or a business. Review the flaws that you have found. So process-wise, department-wise, employee-wise, whatever. Think about, was the environment right? So when the incident took place, what was the pressure, if you like? Was there any stress, pressure? Was it an out of character thing to do because of a situation that they found themselves in as a team? Sometimes you find that a process flaw happens when someone has really tried hard. They're on their own or whatever, and they're just trying to get by. So have a think about the environment. Are they properly trained? So, again, I've said it many times. If they were trained 15 years ago, does that mean they are properly trained? What could have been done to prevent it from happening? So, taking those stresses and pressures into account, was there anything that could have been done different? Like, was the department set up to fail? Was the conditions right for success? Yeah. So you have to be mindful about all these different kind of things when you're considering the next step. The other thing I forgot to mention in the last section was think about the union representation if there is one. The union can be really difficult at times to work with. But at the same time, in my experience, I have found them to be quite reasonable. And what I have found is that sometimes allowing them that space to say what they need to say can actually be a really good deterrent for a manager to think, and a trigger for them to think things through. So I've had examples around it's been disciplinary, but you have examples where things have happened that is a consequence, really, indirectly of something else. And, you might have suggested that a flexible working is approved and the manager said no. And actually this individual's gone on to make errors or whatever. And now you find yourself with a union representative and they actually turn around and say, we did try to eliminate this problem for you by putting in a flexible working request. And you're like, ooh, that's exactly what I said, motherfucker. So sometimes the union, I actually quite like having them around, because sometimes when you're an in-house tool as a HR person, you just get kind of like, it only really happens when they don't know you. I think once they know you and they know what you're about, you don't really get a problem after that. But when you're fairly new and you have no presence because you've never even been there or whatever it might be, that can sometimes help, having someone else to actually say, this is reasonable, the side of the company that you are, etc., etc. So have a think of that. So in terms of the outcome, possible outcomes, as follows in no particular order. No further action and retraining. Retraining could just be something as an outcome. It could be that there's a wider education piece, as I've elaborated on previously. There could be a caution, so informal discussion, caution letter, file note, whatever you want to call it. Or it could be forwarded to a disciplinary. That is the potential outcomes. I prefer to let them know the outcome in person. Like, I don't. Well, you've heard me say it if you've listened through the podcast. I'm not on board with this whole thing of, we'll write to you. I need people to understand it, and I need them to ask questions. So, I'm always of the opinion that we give it to them in person, even if we have to invite them. So if we've adjourned the investigation, I still want them to, sit in front of us again and have the rationale behind the reason, even if it's a no further action. For me, I understand the potential stress that someone could go through if they're invited to a disciplinary or something. So yeah. If you have adjourned, that is a potential outcome on the day. If you have adjourned, make sure you give timescales. If there's a suspension, make sure that you reissue the suspension as well, and that you cover off the grounds and the the expectations as well. It can't just be a thanks for popping in moment. We'll see you in a bit. Just make sure that's reconfirmed. Or even if you're suspending for the first time. I mean, most of the time you got a template letter. Read the template letter. Easy enough. Well, the one thing I would say as well, what's with these pre-written letters and stuff, I prefer, well, if you have a long adjournment, obviously it's reasonable to say that you've written the letter during the adjournment, but having these pre-ready ones in a folder, like, one thing, can we just explain to our managers, if there's anything pre-written, don't let the person see it, man. It's not a predetermined thing. And in case you're wondering what predetermined means, that means you've already decided what it is before you even heard the individual speak, which could then lead you to constructive dismissal or unfair dismissal, whatever one you want to throw it under. So yeah, if you are adjourning, make sure that the rep is aware of when the new reconvening time is. That's also quite important. Seen so many times where people are fucked up because they didn't check if the rep was around. So if you are adjourning, make sure you do a holiday check, any unavailable day check, training check, whatever day they might not be around, check. Remember, because when your investigation, it doesn't imply guilt. Even if you suspend someone, it doesn't imply guilt. But unless they're suspended, the expectation is they're in the business doing their day-to-day living, right? And ensuring that the notes are reviewed and signed. Now, I get a lot of, actually that's a lie, I hear, because I don't see people not sign notes, to be honest. It's few and far between for myself personally. But I hear a lot of times, a person refuses to sign the notes. That's fine, make a note of that. And then when you get to the disciplinary stage, you just ask them to confirm why they didn't sign the notes. So I don't have a problem with it. At the end of the day, for me, you're going to send it to them. It's going to be part of their disciplinary pack, etc., etc. If they don't want to sign it, they have the opportunity to explain why and make sure that that's covered off in the disciplinary. And you need to make sure that that's covered off in the notes, so then that way the disciplinary team know that they need to ask that question. Okay? And then the final part of that is, if there's any actions that need to take place as a consequence of this hearing, you need to make sure they happen. And I know I've said this a couple of times now, but you need to make sure that those actions that you committed to actually take place. So there's no like, we're going to train you and then we just don't fucking do it. Give the timescales as well, and I'd expect that to be on the outcome letter as well. Now, the other thing to point out is, if the outcome is no action, can we go and confirm that in writing as well? Because we do get that piece where, individuals are left with no action, but they've got on file an investigation or whatever, and then, HR person, manager, someone, whoever leaves, and then that person has no idea what the actual sort of end of it was. So the investigation summary kind of is it is the last stage of the investigation. So I've seen 3 different examples, because I've only been in 3 different teams in terms of a HR point of view or as a manager. And for me, I prefer to keep it brief. So I've seen one that is about 15 pages, one that is 2 that are 2. So for me, when you're doing a investigation summary, it's basically making sure you capture all the documents. Actually, let's go through my list, yeah? So, you're ensuring that all the notes are signed or all the notes are present. You're doing a summary of those notes. So, the summary of the key findings. So, I don't go through I don't list every single statement and list every single key finding. I will just highlight the key findings and then put what statement it's in reference to. So for this reason, I always ensure all my documents are scanned and numbered in a certain order. So usually sequential date order, document 1, 2, 3, 4, and all the way through. And then when you're doing your summary, you just put refer to document, whatever. I'll be honest, I used to go as far as to then do highlights within the documents, and then I'd put like A, B, C, whatever. But I just think that's overkill now, I'll be honest with you. I'm sure there are people out there that still do that kind of thing, but for me it's overkill. So I just literally do, I don't know, whatever the point was. It's in document 3, that's enough. So I always scan it in that way. So what I like to do is scan them all as one PDF. Obviously, you might not always be able to do that because of the size of the file and the email limitation. But if you've got 10 documents, you should be able to. So just number 1 to 10, scan it through, all the notes as well, whatever, everything in order, and it's done. Information such as previous sanctions. Now, I got challenged on this very recently. So the sanction was there as well as the reason, and the union rep said to me that was influencing the decision. I mean, it had absolutely no influence, and in the end, it was a no action disciplinary, not because of that specific thing, but it just wasn't a sanction. But anyway, so you can put the sanction on there, but not the reason. So I'll be honest, that's new for me because I'll be honest, I don't do investigation summaries. So this is the thing I don't like. The recommended disciplinary outcome. What? I've only seen that recently. I wouldn't do that. For me, the recommendation is it goes to a disciplinary. I wouldn't be writing anything like that. But what I would write is what the grounds for the disciplinary are, and if I think that they're misconduct or gross misconduct. So, you'd expect that on there. And I think we need to work with people to make them understand it's not a predetermining thing here. So you saying that it should be a dismissal, I don't agree with that. I would just be putting this is gross misconduct and this is the reasons why. At that point, you would then be looking at who the manager and HR representative is for the disciplinary, so you'd want that recorded. And then you'd want to make sure that they have the opportunity to have the whole pack in good time. So, if the employee gets 48 hours notice, I would expect the management team to get another 48 hours notice. It gives them the opportunity to review it, make any notes that they need to. Obviously, you're going to highlight your main findings, but I would prefer that they still have the opportunity to look at it because they might have a better understanding of something, or they may have dealt with something quite similar. For all you know, they could have been the previous department manager themselves of the department. They might have a process understanding of something that is not demonstrated without them being able to look at what is in front of them. So, yeah. So look, that brings us to the end of this podcast around investigations. I didn't think this podcast would be that long, but we have reached an hour, which is amazing. I think investigation for fact-finding, I guess I can talk a lot. But yeah, look, hopefully you learned something. Like I said, I always thought this would be podcast number 1, not podcast number 20, but there we go. So until next time, if there's any feedback, any suggestions, hit the emails, hit the LinkedIn, and catch you on the next one.